So again, everyone, welcome. My name is Caitlin Cameron, and I'm the project director for Thrive, which is the education and outreach arm of Ecovillage at Ithaca. I am fairly new here. I began my position in August and moved into Ecovillage in September. So I'm coming to this conversation with the perspective as a new resident. I'm also a renter. I rent in a house in the Song neighborhood, which is our second neighborhood. There are 3 neighborhoods here at Ecovillage. And I also, I guess, come from the perspective of having lived in many different parts of the country, as a working adult, as a single person. So these are just some of the different perspectives that I can add. And then my guest is Elan Shapiro, who is also an EVI resident and one of the founding members of Ecovillage, one of the founding families that that began it all. So I will go ahead and let Elan introduce himself and then launch into his presentation.
Thanks, Caitlin. I just want to say that I think you're doing a great job for all of us. So thanks for the great care you bring to it. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes about my vision, my efforts, the things that I care about, and then switch into things to do with Ecovillage specifically, especially in areas where I have some professional strengths and interests around communication, conflict, and governance. But we'll be open to any questions you have, and you can use we're going to have like a few minutes of partner sharing to kind of process with a partner what came up for you, what's important to you, what concerns you, what questions you have. So hopefully that'll enrich the chunk of time we have set aside for open-ended questions and conversation. So to start, I'll say that I have many hats, many different identities, and I like them all. And I'm privileged enough at this point so that I don't have a full-time job, so I can entertain many of these possibilities. But sort of foundational to who I am is I'm a meditation practitioner, and I feel like being mindful is foundational to community and to any kind of healing process that we do, which includes taking on huge systemic oppression. It all still requires that we are alert, awake, and centered and relaxed. And so I consider that a part of holistic self-care, which is core to what I do. I have a lot of experience as an educator in different colleges, and now I do kind of community education, adult education work. I have a bed and breakfast, so I'm very interested and involved with ecotourism and edutourism, because people who spend time in my bed and breakfast have many things in there that engage them as a learning experience. I'm an experienced facilitator. I really feel like holding space for people to really listen to each other and to really learn together is central to any progress that we make. And I think it's a skill we can all learn. I feel very, very strong and caring about facilitation process. In the last few years, I've come to identify myself as an artist. I started doodling on the sides of pages in the 70s as a wandering, nomadic, hippie type person. And for some reason or other, in the last dozen years, I've sort of picked up on some of my doodles and turned them into more of a crafted thing. And now I'm making a book. And the themes are about holistic self-care and um, healing activism that engages people in a community collaborative processes and doesn't wear them down and burn them out. So that's what I'm working on as a coloring book. And finally, not finally, actually, I've been an activist in the social justice and sustainability arena for a number of years. And that really is kind of core in my identity. But what keeps me in the ground is that I love to garden. And uh, it's going away in the winter isn't easy because I like to be involved with seeds and starting things and that sort of thing. But this year I did get away. We did a working vacation in Mexico for a month, and it sure felt great. Um, so anyway, that's something about me. And then my vision for things. Um, I feel like we aren't trained to see things in systemic ways, and that we need to do that. And the more we see things in a systemic way, the more clear it is how interdependent things are, both the healing qualities of the community and world we live in, and also the oppressive and exploitative systems that operate at all levels. And so, in looking at it, there's a definite bias towards what's wrong and what's not working, and that can be extremely disempowering and discouraging. And so I feel strongly that people need to find resources that help them to see the immense power of people's power movements, of grassroots things, of intentional communities, of coalitions and experiments. And there's so much of that. Ecovillage is one of tens of thousands of promising experiments. And I love it here, but I don't consider it to be paramount. I consider it to be just part of a rainbow of countless possibilities that most people are clueless about. We all know how endangered we feel, I assume, by climate chaos and by neo-fascism and gross inequality, et cetera, et cetera. But we don't get enough good news about people's movements. And there's tons of that news. So that's part of what I'm about, is helping to popularize things that are encouraging but substantial. They're not just nice, happy news. They're about systemic change. And I believe strongly that people can be educated about it, and that leaps of change are possible, that we have to work on small changes with the systemic change in mind, but it can take years and decades until the leaps happen. And we know that there have been leaps around slavery, leaps around women's rights, leaps about many things, and often, backsliding. But the fact of the matter is that part of what keeps us going is knowing that qualitative change can happen, even if it takes a decade or two to prepare for it. And that's where we find ourselves right now. The risks are very dangerous and very grave, and the possibilities are vast. And the what people are doing is tremendously exciting. And I give lots of clues for that on my website, which is ourcollectiveliberation.org. So if you just look for a minute or two, you'll find a list of organizations and groups that are solution oriented. And you'll also find the stuff that I do that's solution oriented. So that brings me to Ecovillage. And I would say that Ecovillage from the start was problematic for me in a way, because I felt like it was a bit too much of a middle-class model on a hill that was going to be subject to people saying, oh, that's a bunch of privileged white people, it's not relevant to me. And it's true that the vast majority of people of the world that we call minorities are actually the majority. The whites are in a minority in the world. And so, in some ways, we're not the perfect model for how the world could be because we're not. Everybody has a different story and a different piece of the solutions. And I've come to accept Ecovillage's limitations. There are people who come who are new who are saying, we got to get more people of color here. We got to do this. We got to make it more affordable. It's true that it would be nice to be more affordable, and we can gradually make it more affordable and gradually have it be more racially and economically diverse. But the fact is, we're doing great things already, and we have to accept our limits even while we're making those gradual changes. And so what Ecovillage does is it shows that with some intention, people can gradually learn cooperative living skills that are really not hardwired into our culture. They're deep down in our nature, I believe, as animals and as creatures on the earth. There's lots of evidence that cooperation is a successful strategy, actually more than competition, but we have to relearn it because of the depth of the cultural conditioning. And part of what is especially strong to me is we have to really see how we are wired to be thinking of ourselves as separate. We're struggling to have our own success and our own feelings of worth. And we're also in our own cultural bubbles. And we just really don't have much access to people who are seriously disadvantaged and seriously unaware of how to get out of it. So there's a lot of work to do. And what I find beautiful is that in Ecovillage, there are countless lessons for how to break through that isolation into experiencing our interdependence. It really is it's not something you can get in a quick workshop. It's something that takes continuous learning with other people. And that's the power of community here. So what have I learned about communication, conflict, and governance at Ecovillage? Well, first of all, you have to make agreements, and that takes work. It seems tedious, and then you have agreements, and then even so, it's meaningless unless you refresh the agreements. You have to build in ways at meetings or at retreats to say, what have we agreed together? Because again, the larger culture is not supporting empathy. It's not supporting deep listening. It's not supporting pausing when you're feeling like you want to react. So it takes a lot of reminding and training to actually be mindful in group situations. But you have to at least agree on what you're trying to do. So it's important to build in those principles. We don't have a one system, but a lot of us are influenced by nonviolent communication skills, which are really core. At the core, they have to do with clearly expressing your needs, clearly not judging other people, but being descriptive about something in their behavior that you're having a hard time with, letting them know what the hard time is without shaming and blaming. These are core skills, no matter what system you're in, is how to communicate the difficulties and how to communicate lots of appreciation, but to really notice how wired we are to judge, shame, and blame, and just consider it as a lifelong healing meditation practice. Oh, here I am belittling, shaming, blaming. It's built in. I don't think I'm just talking about myself here. I think it's poison in the culture, and it's not anybody's fault. We just have to keep accepting the fact that it's a process of shedding it and noticing it and not judging it, because then you're judging the judging, and that's compound. So, um, uh, so we have a conflict transformation team here that I'm a part of, and sometimes we move forward without a lot of conflicts, but then other times we have conflicts that show up between neighbors around sound or around any number of things, power issues. And we've had lots in the last few years around vaccines and masking, just like the rest of the world, and mandates. And right now we're in the middle of one of those where someone who feels very strongly about vaccines being a very pernicious part of the pharmaceutical industrial complex, uh, um, basically letting the rest of the community know. And there are a number of people who are against vaccines, and I respect them, letting the rest of the people know that they're basically not as progressive and caring as they think they are. And there's a way of sharing it that is kind of demeaning and difficult. So we're all looking at what we do to keep our guidelines without shutting someone down. How do we support free speech? And yet also when the speech feels toxic, what do we do? This is a very core issue in a family, in a community. I'm just going to read an email that came out this morning that doesn't solve the problem, but it's a way of showing how skillful communicators can touch the issue. This is from a neighbor, Jeff Gilmore. I want to appreciate us all for our participation in this experiment of living together with greater connection than the American norm. Connection sounds great on the surface, but we all know that it has both an amazing light side and a deeply distressing darker side when conflict becomes calcified or when it flares hot, which has happened in the last couple of days. I want to honor us all for being willing to work in good faith and relatively good cheer through the ups and downs of living in a way that our happiness and feelings of safety are routinely influenced by the lives and choices of our neighbors. And this is one of the big decisions one has to make when joining a community. We really all influence each other, and that's good and it's scary. And I want to remind us all that a consequence of living this more connected life is that our words and actions have a deeper impact on our neighbors because of this decision to be a bit less defended with each other. So I hope we choose them wisely. It is easy to forget that this choice that we make every day is actually pretty uncommon. And it is easy to lose sight of the beauty of 250 people risking greater vulnerability with each other and having it, for the most part, work out fairly well. So he's very measured, thoughtful, more than most of us can be most of the time, but it sort of encapsulates the issue of community. It's a long-term learning process, but in a sense, there's the pleasure of knowing you're not doing it just for yourself, that people need this across the country and across the world. And if we can learn lessons, we each have networks, we each have family and friends, and we each are influential, even if it feels small at times. Actually, believing in our networks and believing in our relationships has huge impact. But it has to start from our own sense of self-acceptance and our own willingness to be humble and learn gradually over time.
Our intention is to spend the rest of this time, so 30 to 40 minutes, on your questions, and hopefully we have answers for you. And if not, maybe we can all discuss collectively our thoughts about some of these topics. And your questions can be about anything related to Ecovillage at Ithaca, and we will take it from there. Yeah, go ahead. I see Charles and Kelly have a question.
Yeah, thanks. I think I'm really curious, Elan, if you can relatively quickly explain the process by which you all developed those agreements at the very beginning that you mentioned.
Each neighborhood has its own agreements, and then we have agreements at the village level. So usually 2 or 3 people take on a task and then they work it through the group until there's a consensus on it. And I'll parenthetically say that we've been running by consensus for a long time, and lately one of our neighborhoods and also the organization Thrive have been practicing sociocracy, which is a modified form of consensus. And but nonetheless, most agreements engage everyone, especially agreements as important as how we're going to communicate with each other.
Can you elaborate a little more on how each neighborhood arrived at those agreements? Like what did that process look like at the time? Was it in-person meetings? Did someone draft something? Did you refer to what other communities had done?
Yes, I mean, some of us looked at what other communities have done. Like I said, it was, usually it's 1 or 2 or 3 people who draft something and then bring it back to the group, and it goes back and forth. And I think that's the gist of it to me, is that you don't want to have too many agreements because they're not memorable, but you want to make sure that they cover the core issues that are going to come up. And that's the same with what a vision statement is going to be in the group and what the principles. The neighborhood that Caitlin and I live in has 14 core principles that I helped to draft with the group. And each one of those principles is very inspiring, and people get to read it when they're in the membership process and they look at the website. But sometimes it takes months until you can arrive at that, sense of group agreement about it. And then the key thing is not to let it just be a piece of paper or a little bit in a computer, but it's something that you refresh and make it alive again.
And just before we get to the next question, I'll give a little bit of context. So I mentioned at Ecovillage at Ithaca, we have 3 neighborhoods. And so each of those neighborhoods was built at a different time. And our governance structure is such that each neighborhood has its own board, its own governance, and they choose what model to use. Some are using consensus, some are using dynamic governance or sociocracy. So it can vary from neighborhood to neighborhood. And just to give you a sense of scale, the first 2 neighborhoods are 30 households. The third neighborhood is 40 households. So that's kind of the scale of neighborhood that we're talking here. I believe next I saw Karen's hand.
Actually, you just answered.
You answered that.
Just answered.
Okay, great. I read your
Not the
mind, I
neighborhood.
suppose. Dagmar, I think you are next.
Yeah, I think I have a couple of questions, but if I decided to, if I wanted to come and visit, I know sort of the protocol, and I did it last year. I took some tours, virtual tours, and then you have openings to visit at the end of the month, I think, for visitors to come and tour the village, that kind of thing. And then if you really feel that you want to join, is there a time period that you come and live there, and to like a trial period to see how the shoe fits for both parties? And what do you have available for people like myself? And I don't have home equity and a lot of money to sell a house. Like you, I would be a renter. And I've tried to inquire about, that possibility within the village, like who has places to rent. And I don't know how to keep abreast with that. Like, there's no resources, there's no information on your website or anyone to contact. Someone told me once that you don't have a waiting list of folks who are interested in coming in as a renter and things like that. So what are the steps to becoming a member and also to rent? If
Sure. I can start answering, and then Elan, if you can add in later. So a couple of things. So to come visit Ecovillage, there are different options there. So we do have tours at least a couple times a month. So there's a free public tour on the last Saturday of the month, except for November and December. So the next one would be February 25th, and those are always at 3 p.m. on Saturday. So that that is always posted on our website, that opportunity.
Right.
The other option, if you're not able to come that last Saturday of the month, we do afford the opportunity to schedule a tour, and we need at least 2 weeks advance notice to sort of pull that together. And so when someone schedules a private tour, that is for a fee. But once one of those is scheduled, I also post that to the website. So so people know there are scheduled tours happening that they might be able to join. And again, if those dates don't work for you, then we can work something out for a day and time. And the tours are led by a whole group of volunteers and myself. So I'm the only paid employee, if you will, at Ecovillage. And so that's why the tours can vary, right? We are mostly relying on volunteer tour guides. So some of it's dependent on their schedule and availability and things like that. But so there's some options there in terms of tours. And the tours, of course, that's just like a 2-hour chunk of time. We do actually, as part of the Ecovillage membership process, ask people to visit for 5 days, and they don't have to be consecutive, so you can come in different chunks of time or one day at a time. And you also do not have to stay at Ecovillage to fulfill that membership requirement.
Okay, I have a question about that. And also,
Sure.
how much is the tour? What's the cost of the private tour? And if I came and stayed with you for 5 days, is there a fee for that? Do I have to pay to stay somewhere, or do people generally put someone up?
Sure. So the tour starts at $30. It's $30 for one person, and then the rate goes down with more people. So it's $55 for 2 people. And then we also have an option for large groups. So we sometimes will have school groups or large groups come through, and that's a different pricing. So for these small groups, it starts at $30. So people can visit Ecovillage either as that part of that membership process, that 5-day membership process, or people come and visit Ecovillage, maybe they are not necessarily looking to be a member. They just want to come stay up here, see what it's about. And I'll let Elan talk about that and some options for that in a second. But just to finish your point about paying. So we don't really have like dormitories or a residential component. Our particular model is that we have 100 households, so it's all private homes. There are a few people who are offering B&Bs like Elan, or Airbnbs. And occasionally we have other short-term rental opportunities that are made available. So the best way to find those opportunities are to go, so there's the Ecovillage Ithaca.org website. That's the website for Ecovillage.
Yeah.
That's ecovillageithaca.org.
Mhm.
And under live, there's a drop down menu
Mhm.
for livelihoods. So livelihoods is the section of the website that will list any short-term accommodation options that are currently available. And as I said, you could also stay somewhere in Ithaca. You don't have to stay here at Ecovillage. And then one more option folks should be aware of is the ability in good weather to camp here. We do have some locations on property. I don't have the rates memorized for that. It's kind of a, a typical like campsite kind of rate,
Right.
where we've had people tent camp and also in vans and campers. We have those options, and if you are doing that, then you have access to our common houses for facilities, for bathroom and kitchen facilities.
Okay. Yeah.
And then just to
Okay.
finish the thought, and then I'll turn it over to Elan if you want to say anything more about
Mhm.
staying here, because you had a question about renting. So the best way to stay abreast of rental options is going
Mhm.
to be, again, on our website, ecovillageithaca.org.
Mhm.
Under that live section, there's a rentals and sales section of our website. That's
Okay.
going to be the most up-to-date listing for both rentals and sale options.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
Now, something just to be aware of is that people who go through the membership process, who complete the membership process, get advance notice. So how it works is if there are listings, those listings are internally listed for a week. So people who are already here at Ecovillage have access to that listing for a week. And then it's shared with people who've, we do have, it's not a wait list per se, but we have a list of all the people who've gone through our membership process, have completed those requirements, and they are notified, as far as I know, of any listings that come up. And it's going to be much easier to rent or buy if you've already gone through that process, but it's not a, either or situation. So we do have people um who come and stay for a period of time to complete those requirements. But how it works here is that in order to have a lease or a sale approved by the neighborhood board, you have to have met those requirements. And then just the last part of your question is 30 days is, I believe across all three neighborhoods, 30 days is the maximum length someone can stay without having a lease or owning a home. But I did want to give Elan a chance to respond to any of those points as well.
Thank you.
Well, I want to keep it fairly brief because I want to make sure we get some other questions too. But in terms of staying here and keeping it affordable, I think we've had visitors who use the guest rooms when the guest rooms are not occupied in advance through friends and family of residents. Is that currently true, Caitlin? That people are using the guest rooms?
Sorry, I didn't mention that option. Yeah, we do have guest rooms on property. I don't know fully what the rules are around those for that. I believe there's a fee charged, right, for
Modest
people who
fee,
are
yeah.
not, yeah.
Yeah, so that makes it more affordable. Um,
Mhm.
we have a big flow of visitors lately.
Mm.
And so it would not work to be sending out emails every 2 or 3 days saying, does anybody want to put up somebody? It would just add too much to our happily full plates.
Mhm.
But if you're really interested, there's ways to make it work. Let's just put it that way. Sometimes it takes some patience. I noticed that there's a rather complex and important entry from Scott on the chat. Really, zoning is a problem here. We've spent huge amounts of time and money meeting zoning requirements. You know, once we thought we were done with the common building for the second neighborhood, we found out, and we had a pretty sophisticated green architect working on it. We found out that the sprinkler system didn't meet the code level that they wanted, so we had to spend an extra $22,000 to meet that code, and so on. So there are many things that raise the prices here because we're only 2 miles from town, and so there's change to be worked on there. Again, systemic change, policy change, changing the rules. You can't just be, I mean, Caitlin doesn't use a car. I don't do any meat or dairy. And those are important things, but somebody's got to be watching out for the policy changes that make a big difference on the meat industry and on the car industry. And on public transportation. So that's as much as I can say right now in order to be able to give other people a chance. But do look at it, and we could try to address your.
And Scott does have his hand raised, so maybe Scott, do you want to elaborate on your questions?
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, I just across the country this year, and part of my trip was to take the pulse of the nation. And people are generally kind and great and easygoing. And check out a bunch of eco-villages. And yours, from what I can tell, I didn't get to visit, seems among the most advanced, probably the most advanced and stable and evolved of those that I've encountered. And a lot of the old ones are still languishing in how to actually self-regulate and manage their transition to like the next generation. And the biggest problem I found was that there really were very few. There are like little homestead versions with a dozen people or so cramming into a house in an accessory structure, but no one seems to have gotten a breakthrough anywhere that I've seen to actually propagate these and do them at scale, much less do them with tiny homes or the like. The ag land restrictions are just tremendous. And so first question is, could you even do one of these around Ithaca right now if you wanted to?
Sure.
And are there other people leading the way to advance the advocacy and policy change?
Yeah, I'll start, and Elan can add anything I miss. So I actually have a city planning and architecture background and worked for local municipalities in the past, but not in Ithaca. It is often the case that you will have to change the zoning in order to build communities like this. So where we're located, we're on the West Hill in Ithaca. We're 2 miles out of downtown Ithaca. And this land is predominantly zoned agricultural. There is some residential zoning as well, but it was agricultural zoning that would not have allowed the kind of development that we have. And so some of the founding members of the community worked with the town to develop special zoning. So we have what's called a SLUD. It's a special land use development zone specific to our property and our community. And that has been modified over time. There have been times where we've had to do text amendments to that zoning in order to accommodate different things. But I think one thing I'd like to point out, and I don't have a graphic handy to show you this, but yes, I would say often zoning, building codes are not written with this kind of development in mind. And when I say this kind of development, I think one of the biggest challenges is density. So the property we sit on 170 acres. It used to be 175 acres of land. And before Ecovillage was built, there was a proposal for a pretty typical 1 house per acre suburban type development that fortunately did not happen because the developers went bankrupt. They could not proceed. But one of the goals of Ecovillage was to shift the paradigm and say, look, we can house the same number of people on this property in a different way. We can densely cluster the houses together. We can preserve 90% of the land. The original suburban model was 90% built, 10% land, open space. We have flipped that with this design. So our property is 90% open and 10% built, and that's built into our zoning code. We chose to codify those ratios in our zoning code. So that's just a couple of perspectives that I have on it. I think you're absolutely right. In a lot of cases, the zoning would need to be modified. Sometimes it's also a matter of adding definitions to the zoning codes to even capture the idea of a common house or communal living or these kinds of things. Like we have duplexes here, for example. Sometimes zoning won't allow certain construction types like duplexes. So there can be a lot of barriers. I don't know, Elan, if you wanted to add anything to that question.
Well, I'll just say that there's another eco-village a few miles further out of town. They have a few less restrictions than we do. So people are doing what they can do to make it work. But clearly we have to work on the zoning issue more. We have to make it, I mean, in general, housing is a very fraught issue for people in so many ways. Some places they're just zoned for single family homes, and they don't even allow, a backyard apartment. So the whole housing world, because of how inaccessible it is subject to change right now. It's a good time to, if you're inclined, to take a look at, how you can participate in a local committee that's dealing with these issues. Let's make sure.
There are, just so folks know, there are a couple of examples of similar kinds of developments around this area. So Elan mentioned there's another eco-village that started up outside of town. There's also a co-housing community down the hill from us that actually predates Ecovillage. It's not technically an eco-village, it's more co-housing. But they were able to build and establish their community. We also have a pocket neighborhood, which is kind of like co-housing light in downtown Ithaca. So I guess the answer to your question is yes, it can happen in different forms, but it seems like for each of these communities, it's often a case-by-case basis where you have to work out something with the local municipality. I know Aaron has had their hand up for quite some time. Can we move on to them for the moment?
Hi, thanks for taking my question. So I'm in Southwestern Ontario, and we're developing a structure to expand off an existing rural house, so we don't have to do rezoning. But I'm curious if you have any resources of possible consultants that could be paid when we do come to points where we need maybe some outside advice in specific fields when it comes to, say, working with municipalities or creating legal structures.
Yeah, we certainly have our founding resident, Liz Walker, sometimes does consultations with startup co-housing and eco-village communities. And we have a lawyer who sometimes can give helpful consulting advice on the myriad legal complexities of doing one of these things. So yeah, we do have people who can provide that service.
Okay, and what about even designs? Like I have a concept that does harness quite a bit of passive solar gain, and I have been working with some designers in the area, but I know in New York State and Vermont and Maine, I know there's a lot more interest in that. Southwestern Ontario hasn't really caught up with the passive solar concept, so any of those resources would also be very helpful.
Sure. So some of you might not know what passive solar is. Passive solar is actually a guidepost for this community. So all buildings in Ecovillage have to be oriented to the south, take advantage of the largest openings in windows being south facing. So all of our neighborhoods are oriented towards the south and have passive solar components to them, which vary depending on the building design. But to get to your question, so we do have one of our founding residents, Rod Lambert, still does work with some communities on design. He designed quite a few of the homes here, and you can find him on our Livelihoods page. I know in Maine, where I used to live, actually, there's an eco-village designed by Opal Architects, and they have quite a bit of knowledge around this kind of design, passive house design. I think another resource you could look at is the Passive House Institute. I don't know if there's, I would assume there's a Passive House Institute for Canada.
Yeah, I've looked into that.
Yeah,
What was the one you said before that?
I believe they're called Opal Architects, and you know, we're not in the business, I suppose, of making recommendations. I have not worked with them as architects. I just know that they exist and that they've worked on an eco-village community in Maine.
Yeah.
But you could, I would suggest, if you were to look at the Foundation for Intentional Community directory or the Global Eco-Village Network directory, if you see communities whose designs you align with what you're going for, perhaps get in touch with them to find out who their consultants and architects were.
Mhm.
But yeah, I guess we worked with a couple of different architects, but that's another big barrier or challenge to this movement. So Co-housing US, and I think there's also a Co-housing Canada group. That's an organization that's really about supporting the design and development professionals, and they project that we need 200 to 300 more professionals with understanding and training around passive house, passive solar, co-housing design, because there are just not enough professionals that really understand these kinds of communities. But Co-housing Institute, Coho US, and probably there's a Canadian counterpart, is another potential resource I would suggest. I'll put some of those links in the chat.
You're doing a great job. I think we should move on to another person. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. We have about 5 minutes left for questions.
Yeah, we are kind of interested in Ecovillage and potentially coming to visit and seeing if it could be a fit for us to move in with you guys. But we're currently, kind of like looking for a home and looking at a lot of different options. And like, I'm an herbalist and Oliver is a green woodworker. And so kind of our vision for our home was, he'd have a woodworking shop nearby to our house, and I would be maybe able to see clients out of our home or something like that. But just wondering kind of how businesses, I see through the website that there are businesses that are kind of functioning through Ecovillage, and just how that structure functions. Kind of, if you're able to speak kind of monetarily and like legally to that quickly, I'd love to hear more.
Elan, do you want to start?
Well, I'll just say that Ecovillage supports people in starting their own businesses, and we have some co-housing communities in eco-villages have a separate building strictly for small businesses. We don't have that, but we do have a small business, the Gourd business, Gourdlandia, which is also occasionally home to other small businesses that are set up in it. And we also have offices in the common buildings, some of which are for massage or therapy work. So we try to be incubators for small business development. And I think we could do more. I would say that sustainable economic development wasn't like at the top of our list. In some ways, we're sort of halfway between being a green dormitory suburban community and a full-fledged, ecological, spiritual, cooperative, sustainable eco-village. There aren't that many of those, and we're in the zone, like many, where we're in transition. We're doing a little bit more to support small businesses, but there's a ways to go. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, if some people do, maybe you said, sorry, I was looking up some links for folks as you were talking. So some people, you might have already said this, some people have businesses out of their homes. We also, next month's Q&A, we're going to have a couple of folks who make their livelihood here at Ecovillage. Graham from Gordlandia is one of them. So we do have quite a few people who have remote work and work in their homes. And I think that the office spaces are well used. Like, there are a lot of people that appreciate having those office space resources in the common house, and they're used for different things. Some use them as offices, where they're doing IT support. Some use them as therapy offices where they meet with clients. Some use them for health practice, like massage and modalities around health. So there is flexibility. I think the other thing to mention are the four farms we have here at Ecovillage. So we do have parts of our land that are leased for farming operations. So there is potential to enter into a lease with the land holding entity for a land-based operation. And then we have community gardens in each neighborhood where residents can garden for their own use. But some people have worked out arrangements with some of the farmers to partner in growing different kinds of crops on the same property. So I think there are different options, and sometimes it's sort of creating a new model, and there's some flexibility, some opportunity to propose something new.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Great. How about Christina?
Hi. I'm hoping to learn more about the conflict resolution process. You gave an example of something that's going on right now, and I guess ideally, like, everybody would come out agreeing on the topic, but in the absence of agreement, like, how do you like make it to the next steps? And then, I mean, I assume, Elan, you've seen times when I guess the community has moved past it, and I mean, does it generally move past it, and does it get back to a place of, general warm feelings amongst community members, or have there been times when there's been like longstanding strifes between individuals?
Good question. What we do in the conflict transformation team is to use a circle process. So we create kind of sacred space where people really think about the common good and about what their deeper values are. We try to really set a tone so that people are self-reflective and not just thinking, what's wrong with this person? How can I come out on top of this conflict? And more often than not, things work out well. When they don't, well could mean being at more peace with how strong the differences are. And that's an acceptable solution. There are frictions that are not as severe when people have listened deeply. And there are situations where people have left the community because it just was not, they didn't feel like they were being respected enough, or that their perspective was making a dent on what they thought needed to change in the community. So I would just say that we've developed more patience around the process, and we have a fairly broad skill set, and we all have a long way to go.
I think it is important, living in community, you quickly realize that you're going to see these people, if not every day, every week. And that's a strong motivator to come to some terms, of where people can continue to live their lives comfortably. So I think that helps things resolve faster than they might in other communities, because there's just a lot of mutual interest to work things out, and recognizing the discomfort could be even greater if you let things linger or resentment build. That's been my experience in the short time I've been here. But
It's a great phrase that you used, mutual interest. It's a good guiding principle.
so with that, we're about out of time, but I did want to just share with you all some opportunities. So if you didn't get a chance to ask a question today, we have these Q&As every month on the first Wednesday of the month. The next one will be March 1st. You could also submit your questions to us. We have a form on the Thrive website where you could submit something, or email me directly with a question. So we hope this is a resource for folks. So it's not, just today is it. There are other opportunities to, if questions come to you. We also have a couple of tours coming up. So in-person tours on the 16th and the 25th. And then we also have in-person forest therapy walk if you happen to be visiting us at the end of the month. Next month's session, as I mentioned, will focus on livelihoods. Our guests will be Graham and Jim, who have some businesses here at Ecovillage. And also, if you want to just sort of keep in touch with what we're doing, we have a newsletter you could sign up for. We have Instagram and Facebook feeds you could follow. And there are other ways that people get involved with us, volunteering, going through the membership process. So we welcome all of it. And I hope you'll let us know if there are other ideas you have too for kinds of programming that might interest you, or kinds of things, ways that you might want to interact with Ecovillage. So thanks all for being here. Thank you, Elan, for your time today.
Thank you very much. This
Yeah,
was great. I look forward to popping in other months. It's great.
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you all. Have a good rest of your day.
Have a good day.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Have a good one.
Thank you.